to Miami at this time and join us. And thank you very much for your time and for the tremendous chizuk and shiurim for the community. Shraga Zimmerman.
To be honest, if you came from Miami to London in the middle of the winter, that would be Mesiras Nefesh. Shus, the Chavri HaKoilel and the Loimdei HaKoilel. Tonight we're going to discuss names, people that have two names. Truth is, when you go through Tanakh, you won't find almost anyone with two names. And the Achronim say that even if you find someone in Nach with two names, one was a real name and one was a kinui, one was a nickname. In the Rishonim, there were two notable Rishonim that had two names. In Tosfos, there's Rabbeinu Yaakov Yisrael, and there's the Ramah Mefano, Rabbi Nachum Azariah Mefano. They both had two names. Today, it's very, very common that people have two names. And we have a simple chakira we want to discuss tonight. Imagine someone has two names, two totally unconnected names, Reuven and Shimon. They're not connected. My name happens to be Shraga Feivel, but Shraga means light in Aramaic, and Phobius means light in Greek, so really it's one name, it's just in different languages. But if someone has a name, Reuven, Shimon, does he have two names? There are some people that have one name, Reuven, the other people call it Shimon. Each one has one name. This person has two names. Or no? A person only can have one name. This person's one name happens to be made up of two words. But it's one name made up of two words, or is it two different names? That's the chakira we're going to discuss tonight. Now you might be thinking, what earthly difference does it make if he has two names or he has one name which is made up of two words? We'll give you five nafkaminas tonight. And there's many more. Sefer Kolboy says, placebo effect. In Sefer Kolboy it says, brought down in Yeridei Shin Lamed Hey, if a person has a chayla, mishanim shmoi, you make a shinui Hashem on a chayla. The Gemara, that's based on the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Tezayin. Daled Dvarim Mekaran Dinai Shel Adam. One of them is a Shinui Hashem, and we learn it out from the pasuk that says, "Sarai leitikra Shema, Sarai ki Sarah Shema." So you change your name and you change the mazel. The Shla Kodesh says, and the Aruch HaShulchan passes like that. What does it mean that a chayla yemeshana the shem? You add a name. You don't change the person's name, you add the name. You add another name. What name do you add? Some people are believers in adding a name that signifies a refuah, Rafal, Yecheskel, Yosef. There are other minhagim, minig Ashkenaz, is you open up a Sefer Torah, and the first name that you see, that's what you add. Rav Breuer was called Rav Yosef Breuer. At the end of his life, when he was ill, they opened up the Sefer Torah and it said L'Levi Omar, and therefore he became Reb Levi Yosef Breuer. I wonder if they would have opened up the Parshas Balak. I'm not quite sure what would have happened. I once heard from Beryl Pavarsky that he was sitting by the Chazon Ish, and someone came in and asked him, my wife is not well, need to add a name. What name should we add? Chazon Ish looks at him and says, Miriam. So he says, but I have a daughter, Miriam. So he said, Dvaira. So they looked at the Chazon Ish and said, why these names? So the Chazon Ish says, it doesn't make any difference what name you add. The whole idea is a Shinui Hashem. It makes it, you can add anything. I said Miriam because it happens to be Parshas B'Shalach, and she's in Parshas Miriam. He said he has a daughter Miriam, so I went to the Haftarah, which is the Shiras Dvaira, and I said Dvaira. But Al Kaponim, Minig Ashkenaz is you add a name. If you look in Chuvas Maram Chalava, he complains about this minig. He says the people are not changing names; they're just adding a name. Ve'ein zeh shinui Hashem. This is not called a shinui Hashem. It's not going to help. El tzorach l'shanoisa legamri. You have to change it totally. L'chayra, they're arguing about this nekuda. The makar is from Sarai. Her name was changed to a different name, Sarah. The Shla Kodesh is saying that if you add a name, you've accomplished the same thing. Because the Shla Kodesh was learning that when you add a name, now the person has a totally new name. Before they were called Miriam, now they're called Miriam Devar. It's a totally new name. It's like God, you switch to Gideon. So too, when you add Reuven and you add Shimon, now the person has a totally new name called Reuven Shimon. Because he's considering it one name. The Maram Chalava says, no, it's not so. You're not changing the person's name. The person's Reuven, and he's still Reuven. He just added another name, Shimon, and therefore it's not sufficient. That's one chelik. Now let's go to Hilchas Gittin, a bit more serious. It says in Even Ezra, Siman Kuf Chavtes, Sif Yudalet, Mi sheyesh lo shnei shemes. What happens if a person has two names, Reuven and Shimon? Kaisvin, the Mechaber says, Reuven the Miskeri Shimon. You call him Reuven, who is called Shimon. And this is how when we write a get, commonly you write many names, everything the person is called, and you write, the person's name is Avram Yaakov, the Miskeri Avram, Hamachuna Itzik, let's say. Because you write out everything. So he says, if a person has two names, you write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon. The Mechaber says, if Imkal Sav Reuven Shimon, if you write Reuven Shimon, Puzzle, the get would be puzzle. Comes along the Ramah and says, because at the times of the Mechaber, people were only called by one name, even if they had two names. Comes the Ramah, the I Nikresh B'Shnei Shemes Yachad Kosher. If, however, the person is called both names, then it's going to be kosher if you write Reuven Shimon. Now the lashon of the Ramah sounds like he's agreeing to the Mechaber you should write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon, but if you wrote Reuven Shimon and he happens to be called both names, it would be kosher. And in fact, is that what the Ramah meant or no? Did the Ramah mean that if he's called both names, you should bedafka write both names? So if you look in the Beis Meir, the Beis Meir says, it's mavur from the lashon of the Ramah, who writes, the I nikra shnei shemes yachad kosher, which is the Evid, that l'chatchila the Ramah is moided to the Mechaber, that even if the person is called by both names, you should write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon.
What does it mean called Shimon if he's called both?
He's Reuven and he's called Shimon.
He's not called Shimon, he's called Shimon. I mean, it's called both names. He might not be called the first yet.
Okay, so we'll explain it. But that's what the Beis Meir says, that you should write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon. If you happen to write Reuven Shimon, it will be kosher. It's obviously that the Beis Meir learned that Reuven and Shimon are two names. It's not that he has one name called Reuven Shimon. He has two names. His name is Reuven and his name is Shimon. Just like there's one person called Reuven, another person called Shimon. This person has two names. And therefore the Beis Meir learned that even according to the Ramah, you're supposed to write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon. He's Reuven, which is called Shimon. Why Reuven for Shimon? Assuming that he's called Reuven more often than he's called Shimon. The Beis Shmuel disagrees, and he says, Lashon haRamah eina meduktik. The Adarabba, if someone is called both names, if you would write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon, it would be puzzle. So the Beis Shmuel is saying, no, you should write Reuven Shimon, and if you wrote Reuven the Miskeri Shimon, it would be puzzle. Question is, why would it be puzzle in the Beis Shmuel? Now, two ways of learning the Beis Shmuel. Is it pshat because he holds that Reuven Shimon is one name? So if you're going to divide the name, and you write Reuven the Miskeri Shimon, you divided a person's name. It would be like someone who's called Reuven and you wrote Re'u the Miskeri Bein. Is that the reason why it's no good? Or no? Even the Beis Shmuel holds, like the Beis Meir, that Reuven Shimon is two names. But it so happens to be that if you write Reuven the Miskri Shimon, it makes it sound like there isn't anyone who calls them both names, and that's misleading. This is what we call a Shini Hashem. So the Shaila is in the Beis Shmuel, who says that it would be possible if you wrote Reuven the Miskri Shimon. Is it because you had a Chatzi Shem, or is it because it's a Shini Hashem? And this is a Beferish Machlekes. If you look in the Piskei Tshuva in Ebenezer Kuf Chavtes Sif Katan Lamed Vav, it brings the opinion of the Tshuvas Galia Meseches that it's all one name. And therefore, if you write Reuven the Miskri Shimon, it's possible because you didn't write a name in the get. You wrote half names. But the Piskei Tshuva himself says, no, I don't think that's pshat. I think the Beis Shmuel also holds that it's two names. It just so happens to be that it's misleading if you write Reuven the Miskri Shimon, because it sounds like that some people call him Reuven, some people call him Shimon, and when in reality everyone calls him Reuven Shimon. What's the nafkamina in this? Beis Meir says, write Reuven the Miskri Shimon. Beis Shmuel says, you don't. We happen to paskin like the Beis Shmuel. So when we write a get and someone is called by both names, we'll write Reuven Shimon. If some people will call him Reuven, we'll write Reuven Shimon, the Miskri Reuven. What's the nafkamina? Let's say you have a person who is actually called Reuven Shimon. Everyone calls him Reuven Shimon. And you wrote a get, and you just wrote Reuven. Not Reuven the Miskri Shimon, just plain Reuven. So now it will be totally in how you learn the Beis Shmuel. If Shat in the Beis Shmuel, the reason why Reuven the Miskri Shimon is possible because you wrote only a half a name. So if you write just Reuven, you also wrote a half a name, and the get would be possible. If, however, the problem with writing Reuven the Miskri Shimon is because it's misleading, well, if you write Reuven alone, then it's not misleading. That's not called a Shini Hashem. This is a klal in Gittin, that when you write a get, if you wrote one name and you got it right, even if you only write the kinui, he has a nickname and you just write the kinui, the get is kosher. That's why many times when we write Gittin in Europe and England, it's common that even secular people write, come for a get. And you ask them their Shem Kodesh, it's very doubtful. They heard from a great aunt or whatever. When was the last time you were Shul? Bar mitzvah. What were you called up then? Denknish. Thing. But what does everyone call you? That everyone knows what it calls you. And therefore, many times when we write a get, we just write the English name or even the English nickname, Eddie, Ayin Dalet Yud. Because if you write a get and it just says Eddie, then you should know the get is kosher. If you're going to write Elio, the Miskri Eddie, and his name is not Elio, the get is going to be puzzle. So in Mela, we're going to have a big nafkamina here. If you're going to write just Reuven on a person who's called Reuven Shimon, according to the Beis Shmuel, that Reuven the Miskri Shimon would be puzzle, what would be if you just wrote Reuven? And this is a machlekes. In Chuvas Marnach, he says it's puzzle. The get is totally puzzle. Mifnei shekosav rak chatzi shei. He only wrote a half a name. In the Sefer Michtav Milyo, not Rav Dessler, but the one on Shemus Gittin, he says it's kosher the loy havi shenei Hashem. It's not a shenei Hashem. The mamish arguing in this nekuda. Baruch atah Adonai, le'einu melech haolam shakal nevroi. So we went through Shinei Hashem for a chayla and for Gittin. Let's go on to something else. Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. Well-known Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says, Lo yisa adam isha sheshma kashem imay. Don't marry a woman who has the same name as your mother. Oy shmoi kashem chamov. Well, the chassan shouldn't have the same name as his father-in-law. The Achrayim speak about what happens if one of them has one name and one of them has two names. One's called Avram and one's called Avram Yitzchak. So many Achreinim say that that's all right, that's acceptable. But why it's acceptable, they have a machlekes. Some Achreinim say the Afla, the Hush of Moshe, the Mili, the Chasidasa, they say as simply as follows: we don't understand what are the reasonings behind the Tzoras Yehuda Chassid. It's something mystical. And therefore, when something is mystical and you don't understand it, you don't say svaras in it. You just keep it exactly as it's written. But if the case is slightly different than what was written in Tzoras Yehuda Chassid, you don't keep it. And therefore, if this one is called Avram and this one's called Avram Yitzchak, so Rabbi Yehuda Chassid didn't say anything about it. It's mutter. That's how they explain it. If you look in Tshuvas Tzemach Tzedek of Lubavitch, and that's what is known Shem L'chsam Sefer, they say a different reason. The reason why someone as Avram could have a son-in-law called Avram Yitzchak is because it's two different names. This person is called Avram, and this person is called Avram Yitzchak. Pashat, totally different names. And Mamela, that's why it's mutter. What's an nafkamina? Let's say they're both called Avram. You want to do the shidduch, can you add a name? Get up at the vart and say, V'karei Shmai V'Yisrael Avram Yitzchak. So in Tshuvas Nishal David, Ruach Chaim, Shulchan Ezer, they say no. It's too late. Furthermore, what happens if you have people, one has one name, one has two names, but no one calls the one with two names by the second name? They're all referred to as the same. So Reb Shlomo Kluger and Kina Seifrim, the Dvar Moshe say it's aser. The Tzemach Tzedek in his Tshuva, where he says it's not a problem of Tzavos of Yehuda Chassid because it's two different names, says, you can just add a name. If you want to do the shidduch and you want to be makpid on Tzavos of Yehuda Chassid, you just add a name. And even if no one ever uses the name, because it's Pashat, these are people with different names. In fact, it's well known, Chassam Sofer had a son-in-law, had a daughter, Simcha, and took a son-in-law called Moshe. And he got up at the Vart and said, there is a Tzavos of Yehuda Chassid, and therefore we have to add a name. And he called his son-in-law Moshe Tovia. And he said that really it's impolite to go change your son-in-law's name. Fathers-in-law are not supposed to push around their sons-in-law, and the first thing you don't do at the Vart is change his name. But he says, it so happens to be that I'm much older than my son-in-law, and everyone knows me for his Moshe for so many years, it's much easier for him to change his name than for me to change my name, and therefore he apologized and he changed his son-in-law's name. So, which doesn't mean you can push around your son-in-law if you apologize. You sit on an English and Torah, everyone's very polite there, but it doesn't mean that they're really nice, they're just polite. So, so like what one lawyer speaks to the other lawyer at a din Torah, and they say, in all due respect to my learned colleague, and then they say he's a ganav and a shakran and whatever. So but it goes with a nusach, in all due respect to my learned colleague. So you shouldn't do this with your son-in-law. But Al Kapanim here, they had to do the shidduch. But Al Kapanim, what are they arguing on? They're arguing in this nakuda. Is the heter in Tzavos Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, when one person has two names and one person has one name, is it because it's not like the tzavah? So then we look at it when they're getting engaged. If, however, the heter is, like the Tzemach Tzedek says a beferish, and it's presumed that the Chassam Sofer also held so, the heter is that it's Pasha two different names. This person's called Moshe, and this person is called Moshe Tovia. Moshe Tovia and Moshe are plain two totally different names, different people. So it doesn't make a difference whether you add it, whether people use it or not. It's Pasha people with different names. So that's the next nafkamina. So we went through Shini Hashem, Gittin, Tzavos Yehuda Chassid. Next, common Ashkenazi custom that we name children only after people that are no longer alive. Sfaradim hold it covered, you name it after the grandfather, but in Ashkenaz, don't name after people, only people that are not alive. One of the great Rabbanei Ashkenaz was called the Würzburger Rav, Rabbi Yitzchak Dov Bamberger. Actually, his son was, his anicle of his was here yesterday. It's called the Würzburger Rav, Rabbi Yitzchak Dov Bamberger. He was known more by his German kinui Rab Seligman Ber Bamberger. To give you an idea of his greatness, they gave out recently the Tshuvas of Rab Shmuel Salant. Shmuel Salant came from Volozhin. He moved to Yerushalayim in 1840 to become the Rav there, and he was Nifter in 1909. So he was Rav in Yerushalayim for 69 years. Pretty rough place to be a Rav, imagine, for 69 years. And in his Tshuvas, he has a shaila. Can the Rav wear like a priest's garment? They called it a talar in German. Or is that called loiselchu b'chukas hagoy? And Shmuel Salant writes that I always assumed that it's chukas hagoy to wear such a garment. But I happened to be traveling through Germany, and I came into the Shul of Würzburg, and I saw there Rab Seligman Ber Bamberger, who is the Tzaddik Hadar, and I saw him wearing one, so it must be that it's mutter. You know, Shmuel Salant saw many, many great people in his life, and he happens to refer to him as the Tzaddik Hadar. So anyway, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Dov Bamberger. His father-in-law's name was Rabbi Yitzchak Zekel. Okay, two different names. Anyway, Rabbi Yitzchak Zekel, the father-in-law, is Nifter. After the father-in-law is Nifter, Rabbi Yitzchak Dov Bamberger has a boy. At the bris, he gives the name, V'kari Shmoi V'Yisrael Yitzchak Zekel. People were horrified, mystified. I mean, you call your kid Yitzchak Zekel, your name is Yitzchak. And the Würzburger Rav looked at them and said, what are you talking about? My name is Yitzchak Dov, and this child's name is Yitzchak Zekel. Mamash no shaykhs one with another. And therefore, it's totally permissible. Not totally permissible. I don't even understand what you're asking. I'm called Yitzchak Dov, and he's called Yitzchak Zekel, and it's two totally different names. Pretty clear that he understood that Yitzchak Dov was one name, not he had a name Yitzchak and he had a name Dov, and now his kid has a name Yitzchak and his kid has a name Zekel, but it's one name, and we'll prove it soon that Hitaka really held so. And therefore, his name is Yitzchak Dov. This child's name is Yitzchak Zekel. So it's two totally different names.
If someone names a child after someone that had two names and he picks one of the names, he's also not naming it.
Depends what you're trying to do when you give a name. The machlekes Churas Shai and Minchas Elazar, when you give a name, are you trying to pull over that person's neshama into the child, or are you just trying to remember the child, the person? And he says that the nafkamin is, do you have to give the whole name or not? If it's just a memory, so however you remember the person. If, however, you're trying to pull over the neshama, it has to be the same thing. What's the machlekes? Can you name someone after a person who died and is not buried yet? Shai says you can't because he still needs his neshama for another few minutes. And the Minchas Elazar says no, it's just the zakar. Anyway, now, so that's one story with the Würzburger Rav. Now let's go to a different story. The Nitziv was called Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. He had a son-in-law, Rabbi Fol Shapiro, a Shiva of Volozhin. Fol Shapiro had a famous son-in-law called Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Fol Shapiro himself was a son of Reb Arya Leib Shapiro, known as Reb Leib Lekovna, one of the great Gedolim of Lita, probably the Bar Plukta with Rabbi Yisrael Salanta in about Musar. Put that aside. Now, one day, Reb Leib Lekovna is Nifter. Rabbi Fol Shapiro, his son, has a son. wants to give a name after his father, and he does. The Sandik was the Zayda, the Nitziv, and he gives a name, Koyesh Mar Yisrael, Aryeh Leib. The Nitziv, who's there at the brisk, Sandik, holding the kid, it says, what do you mean Aryeh Leib? Mir Ruftman Hirsha Leib. Although his name was Naftali to Yehuda, everyone called him Hirsha Leib. How do you give a kid the name Leib of Mir Ruftman Hirsha Leib? So you see that the Nitziv himself did not hold that Hirsha Leib and Naftali to Yehuda Hirsha Leib is a different name than Aryeh Leib. Now, what did Rabbi Fal Shapiro, the son-in-law, what did he answer back? Fal Shapiro said, you know why you're complaining? Because you're a Litvak. Now, he did not mean it to come out the way it sounded, because Rabbi Fal Shapiro himself was a Litvak. And this is what he explained. He says, Aryeh means a lion. The Yiddish translation of a lion is a leib. Or, if you did Polish pronunciation, you'd call him a leib. Yehuda means praise. Yehuda ata yeducha achecha. The Yiddish translation of it is loib. Varai, the Maral, is called Rabbi Yehuda Loib. Navas, because you're a Litvak, and you pronounce a chaylim like a tzere, so Amela, to you, Leib and Loib sounds like the same thing, that's why you're complaining. But you should know, it's a b'chal nish kashum shaychis. It's nishta kashum shaychis b'chlal. My father's name was Aryeh Leib, and your name is Hirsha Leib. You just pronounce it a chaylim like a tzere. Very important to say. Thought went further into this, is that really there's Aryeh Leibs, the Yehuda Leibs, and there's Chaim Leibs. Like Chaim Shmulevitz was called the Chaim Leib. That L'chayra Leib is Leb, like from the Lashon of living. So really, although many of us pronounce everyone as Aryeh Leib, with Yehuda Leib, with Chaim Leib, it's mamish three different things. There's Aryeh Leib, or Leib if you want to. There is Yehuda Leib, and there's Chaim Leib. I happen to have a son called Yaakov Leib. I haven't figured out that one yet. Well, upon him, what are they arguing about? The Würzburger understood Yitzchak Dov and Yitzchak Zekel are Pasha two different names. And they're two different names. The Nitziv and Rabbi Fal Shapiro didn't understand it like that. The Nitziv felt, even though my name is Hirsha Leib and the child's name is Aryeh Leib, but you're giving the same name. Even Rabbi Fal Shapiro, who did it, was only because he had a cheshbon that stuck at different names. This one is called Leib, and this one is called Leib. And that's the fourth chilik. It's wondering like this. At the end of Shemon Esrei, there's a minig based on a Shloh Kodesh to say a pasuk that begins and ends with the first and last letter of your name. Now, imagine someone has two names. Let's say Avram Yitzchak. Does he say two psukim, one starting with an aleph, ending with a mem, and another one starting with a yud and ending with a kuf? Or does he say only one pasuk, starting with an aleph and ending with a kuf? I've speculated about this, and I wondered, I wanted to postulate that the Würzburger Rav, who said Yitzchak Dov and Yitzchak Zekel are two totally different names, probably only said one pasuk, starting with a yud and ending with a beis. And I decided I'll find out. Called up, there's a prominent enical in Manchester called Reb Simcha Bamberger. Gives the largest Afyomi share in Europe. And I asked him, your grandfather, the Würzburger Rav, how many psukim did he say after Shemon Esrei? And he said he only said one pasuk after Shemon Esrei. Started with a yud, ended with a beis. He said, how do I know that? He says, how do you know that? A few generations back. He says, because my name is Simcha Chaim, and I say only one pasuk starting with a shin and ending with a mem, because that's what my father, who was called Yitzchak Dov, told me to do. So I know that in our family we only say one pasuk. This is l'shitase, that it's all one name. I would like to speculate, and this I have no way of proving, that the Netziv said 3 psukim. And Mamela, he considered it 3 different names. I was giving a shir in London on this, and someone told me he also had this shaila. He had 2 names. Should he say 1 pasuk or 2 psukim? And he decided he's going to ask Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Chaim Kanievsky had 3 names: Shmaryo, Yosef, Chaim. And he asked Reb Kanievsky, "Do you say 1 pasuk or do you say 3 psukim?" And Reb Chaim said, "I say 4 psukim. I say 1 starting with a shin and ending with a mem, and then 3 for all of them, because I don't know myself the answer to this question, Vanan Manena Vasrei." So Al Kaponim Va'ofen, just to review what we learned tonight, is that we have a Chakira is a person who has 2 names. Does he have 2 names, or does he have 1 name comprised of 2 words? The nafkamin is Shini Hashem. In Hilchas Gittin, if you write 1 of them. In Savos Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, can you just add a name which nobody will use? Furthermore, in naming people, and the pasuk after Shemon Esrei, just like to add 1 thought, which I believe is a very good raya. There's a Tosefta in Kiddushin that says, "Hari at mukudeshes li amanas shani besam." A man tells a woman, "I'm mukudeshes to you, amanas that I work in, I'm a chemist." V'nimtza besam v'bursi. And it turns out he's a chemist and a tanner. Harizu mukudeshes. Almanas she'eni ela besam. I only work in Sam, Eina Mekudeshes. And this is a Rambam in Hilchos Ishus. The Tosefta continues. V'chein ha'ayim l'isha hayat Mekudeshes li almanas shani Yosef. Again, almanas that my name is Yosef. V'nimtza Yosef Shimon. And it turns out his name is Yosef Shimon. Harezem Mekudeshes. Almanas she'eni ela Yosef, Eina Mekudeshes. The Tosefta is comparing Yosef Shimon to Sam and Bursi. Now, Sam and Bursi is two separate occupations. No one's going to say he's a Bursi Sam. He's a Sam, he's a chemist, and he's a tanner. And the Tosefta is comparing it. Therefore, l'chayra, what we see from the Tosefta is that he held that it's taka 2 different names. With this, you can explain a very difficult Tosefta. Tosefta in Gittin says, if a person has 1 name begolol and Shem Echad Yehuda, Reb Shimon Omer Kosav Shem Echad Megureshes. Even if you write 1 name as Megureshes. Taisus and Daf Lamed Daled in Gittin says it can't be. Depends where you wrote the get, depends where the Nesinas are get. And Taisus says you have to change the Girsa in the Tosefta and say Pasuk. The Bir Agra and Shulchan Aruch on this halacha says you have to change the Girsa to say Pasuk. But Lamais in our Tosefta it says kosher. And if you look in Chazon Yecheskel from Pratzkel Abramsky, he says, I went through many Kisvei Yodis on Tosefta, and all of them said kosher. The Chay of the Pshat is, because the Tosefta, Loi Mebay, according to the Beis Meir, that a Reuven Shimon that writes, Reuven the Miskri Shimon is kosher, but even if you hold like the Beis Shmuel that it's possible, but that could be al Shini Hashem. But writing 1 of them alone would be enough, like the Mechtam Elio. So the Tosefta in Gittin holds like the Tosefta in Kiddushin, which holds that it happens to be 2 names. Have a good day. What?
You're right, again.
I haven't placed it on, not like that. I happen to be learning Tosefta at the moment. I got to know.